What did the late Queen Elizabeth II really think and feel about the biggest royal issues of our time and the quite pesky Prince Harry and Meghan Markle? Well, Hugo Vickers is one of our generation's foremost historians, specialising in the British royal family. His new book, Queen Elizabeth II, A Personal History, is based on 60 years of the most personal observation and detailed research, which resulted in having over 40 personal meetings with the late Queen. The first in 1968. At that time, the Queen was a young mother, but those encounters would last for another 55 years. And over those decades, he became one of the closest confidants of the royal court. And that is why this best-selling book and the revelations within it are, in my view, incredibly significant when it comes to royal history. So Hugo Vickers, it is a delight to have you here on Outspoken for the first time. I absolutely loved this book. And you can imagine for me, having reported on Megxit and everything that was going on at that time, it was so fascinating to hear. And I mean, I wasn't happy about it, don't get me wrong, but it was so devastating in a way to hear quite how much this impacted the late Queen. Indeed, you write in the book that the distress Harry and Meghan caused the Queen can't be overstated. And I just think that's such an indictment on them, Hugo.
Yes, well, what I was sad about was that, the Queen did have this absolutely fantastic reign of 70 years. And at the time of her Platinum Jubilee, she should have been sort of sailing into sunlit uplands. And instead of which, she had problems of Prince Harry and Meghan. She had problems with the government, with Brexit and all those things, and her health, obviously, and Prince Andrew and things like that. And it was very sad that the last years were rather sort of overshadowed by that. But of course, it's only a small part of a very, very much bigger picture, the whole reign, which of course I did find absolutely fascinating. And I think we were incredibly lucky to have her for so long. And I can't think of a reign in history in which, under any political or economic circumstances, I would have preferred to live.
100%. I mean, for me, I'm very clear on this. I think she's the greatest monarch we've had. I know that there's obviously competition from the likes of the First Elizabeth and Victoria, but for me, it's very clear because, as you say, it felt like such an honor to grow up and be part of the second Elizabethan age. At the same time, I did always have this horrible feeling, Hugo, that when she went, things would fall apart. And to an extent, and I don't celebrate this, but to an extent, that has sort of proven to be true as well. I think sometimes people underestimate how much she was there for the country at the most difficult moments. And I don't know which ones stand out for you, but for me, obviously, COVID was a big moment, and the "We will meet again" speech at a time when the country seemed to be falling apart. But there's others too, of course. The death of Princess Diana, where maybe she didn't cope immediately because of the focus on her family, but then very quickly took that role again. But it dates long back before that, doesn't it, to terrible events like Aberfan as well.
Well, yes, and exactly. And so, for example, when the Queen went to Grenfell...
I need you to do something for me right now. It is free, it is easy, it is simple. Just hit that subscribe button on YouTube. That's because over 50% of you watching this video haven't done that yet. And it is the best way. No big tech backing, no billionaires pulling the strings. And if you turn on the bell, you'll get alerted to all our new videos.
Tower to console the people who have been that tragedy. When Theresa May went, inevitably people said, oh, it's all just political. When the Queen went somewhere like that, she was just comforting her people. And, and she brought with her, as you rightly suggest, Aberfan, Dunblane, and all the other places that she'd been to. So she had this sort of growing portfolio of experience. And the fact that, I wasn't at Grenfell Tower, but I know people who were, who said, the atmosphere was amazing when she went there, just because she'd taken the trouble to come out and comfort her people at this awful moment. And there were several times like that in the reign. You quite rightly mentioned the COVID speech. And of course, I love that "We will meet again." But of course, she also, if you remember, casually sort of dropped in the fact that she had made another speech from Windsor Castle 80 years before, during the war, when she was a little girl, with her sister, Princess Margaret. Amazing. I mean, who else could do that?
No one else could. That is the issue. And again, I think it makes it so sad that at that exact moment, when, remember, she was in that bubble and her health was very bad, and obviously Prince Philip's health was bad, and we will come to that, she was trying to grapple with Megxit and a lot of the issues that it dealt with. So I want to come to some of the specifics in your book. You know, there's quite a few bombshells there, Hugo. But you actually quote the late Queen, and this is after Megxit, saying about Harry, and now Harry has opted out. And for what? To be a carer for Archie. So it sounds like she had almost a bit of a premonition that this life in California wasn't going to work out for her grandson.
Well, I think if you put it into the wider perspective, if you think of what happened to her father, who had to opt in after the
Yes.
abdication and take on the most difficult role that anyone in this country has, basically, of being the king, with no training. His brother had been trained for the job, and George VI wasn't, and he did a fantastic job. And of course, I've always thought her philosophy was that she wanted to be a very good daughter to her father and do the best for him, which is she certainly did. And so, of course, she wouldn't look very kindly, I don't think, on somebody opting out like that. And I mean, I've even gone further, I'm afraid, and said, because you remember he was Captain General of the Royal Marines, which is a very prestigious position to hold, which he took on from Prince Philip. And I said, you cannot be Captain General of the Royal Marines when you're lying barefoot under a tree in California, which is
Yes.
what it came to. So I think in a way she felt, because apart from anything else, you will remember this very clearly. I mean, he was doing a very good job. He was terribly popular. I mean, I saw him in the Commonwealth Overseas Territories. He played cricket with the children or football. They loved him. They thought he was really great. And
Hugo, he
he was
was sometimes more
happy.
popular than her. And
Yeah, of
like
course.
that feels extraordinary now. But sometimes
Yeah.
his approval ratings were higher than the late Queen.
Well, there was a lot of sympathy for him, remember, because of what happened with his mother. And, the fact that every now and again, when he got into a sort of a scrape of some kind, people actually, his popularity soared. They thought, well, good on him. He's doing a great job. I live in a certain amount of chaos, and I found a copy of Hello magazine lying on the floor, and I picked it up and I looked at it, and there was Prince Harry smiling and happy and things. So I thought, goodness, what's this? And then I looked at the date, 2015.
Yeah.
Meghan. He doesn't look happy now, poor chap.
No, he definitely doesn't. He definitely doesn't. Then there's another really historically important part of this. And again, I covered it all really closely, but I think what you're revealing in your book is very important here. And it connects to the Oprah Winfrey interview, because of course, Hugo, that was a devastating moment, right?
Yeah.
What they did, it was like throwing this grenade into the British royal family and false accusations of racism, let's be very clear. But at the time, the royal family didn't know what type of damage it would do and all of that. But one of your key revelations in this book, and it's something that I've always criticized Harry and Meghan for, was going ahead with this interview knowing how unwell Prince Philip was. And you actually reveal, Hugo, that it was worse than what people even knew at the time, and that his medical team reported to nearly losing Prince Philip twice. And yet Prince Harry and Meghan Markle still decided to allow the interview to go ahead.
Well, the really sad thing is, I mean, with what happened when COVID came along, Prince Philip was living mostly at Wood Farm at Sandringham, where he was
Yes.
having a nice time. He was sort of painting and reading and carriage driving and so on. The Queen used to go up there from time to time. And then when COVID came, she quite rightly brought him back to Windsor Castle very quickly. So they spent more time together in Windsor Castle in the last year and a half or so of their lives than they had done, because each one was moving around a lot. So anyway, so then you get this situation which is very sad, that he had to go into hospital, and so off he went. And yes, they did really nearly lose him twice. And as you know, he then eventually came back to Windsor Castle. It took a long time to get him back because the nurses had to be absolutely COVID free. That was the point. And so they had to be isolated and so forth. And for this interview to go ahead at this particular moment, and as we know, in retrospect, of course, he died very soon afterwards. Well, I think that's very shocking. And at the time, people like me, no doubt people like you as well, had to be rather careful how we handled this interview, because
Mm.
she raised two very important issues. One was to do with race, and the other was to do with mental health. So if you said anything contrary to that, in a way, you risked looking really kind of surly and churlish. And those two cards she played, as we now know, quite a lot of what she said was absolutely untrue. And I think it's there was a disgraceful exercise altogether.
Yeah, I mean, Piers Morgan obviously lost his job, didn't he, for saying that it was a lie? I mean, I was quite lucky at the time, Hugo, because I was a columnist for the Daily Mail and was just about to start at GB News, and they allowed me to report the truth, actually, which is that this was a tissue of lies. But I know there are a lot of other people who were quite nervous about doing that. And we had that Recollections May Vary statement that came from the late Queen and has become quite legendary. But at the same time, Hugo, when you think about this period, and again, you've got to be sensitive with this, but I think it's easier now that Prince Philip and the late Queen Elizabeth II are not here. But there are people within the British royal family, and there are members of the British royal family who do believe that stress is a big part of exacerbating cancer, and that Catherine's cancer battle, which came, was in part exacerbated by some of the stress that had been caused by that Sussex exit and the claims in the book. When you talk about the fact that the distress the Sussexes caused the Queen in the last years of her life cannot be overestimated, I mean, in other words, from your book, can you just elaborate a bit on what you mean by that? Are you suggesting that it had an actual physical impact on Her Majesty? Because mentally, obviously, she remained acute. She was, she was all there. So was this more a physical thing?
Well, it's very hard to say, isn't it? I mean, if you think about it, the death of Prince Philip, of course, would also have had a big effect on her because
And
they
it
were
did.
so strong together, and he was so argumentative, because by being argumentative, you get to a conclusion. If you just agree with everybody meekly, you don't get anywhere. But he liked to say, I mean, every time something came up, it was like, have you thought about doing it this way? Have you thought about doing it that way? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And then, of course, to lose that, to begin with, what happened was that she was very, very sensible. I think at the age of very nearly 95, she didn't sort of go into a long period of mourning. She kept going. But I think if she'd retreated, she might have found that very difficult. But my theory, and it's only a theory, is that when she went up to Scotland in the summer, it hit
Yes.
her, but grief always does. And she looked terrible when she came back down to Windsor in October of 2021. And then, of course, things started to go wrong, as you know. And she was lucky that she was able to get through the Platinum Jubilee, and she was determined to do so. But there were one or two indications that they were very nervous about her health, one of which was that literally on the 1st of January, she appointed Camilla to the Order of the Garter and Tony Blair,
Mm.
on the grounds that, it was much easier if she appointed Tony Blair than leaving it for Prince Charles to do so when he became king. And they were frightened. Normally, the Garter Knights announced on the 23rd of April. So they were worried that she might not actually survive until then, which she did, as you know, right through till September. So as to the effect that these other issues had, it's not really for me to say what effect, but they can't have done good. They certainly didn't help matters. Let's put it like that. And I think, stress is very difficult, and it's just actually just rather sad because I
Yeah.
think, while we were all celebrating her, she had all these things going on in the background.
Yeah, indeed. And the thing is, Prince Harry was making demands of her, which feels
Trying to
quite grim given her age.
would probably tell you that the courtiers were blocking him and stopping
Yes,
him talking to her, and of
which
course
they
the reason
were,
they,
in
which they
fairness.
were, which they were, but they were doing it to protect the Queen, because the
Yeah,
Queen as a grandmother was likely to
yeah.
say, oh, well, don't worry too much about that, or whatever. Anyway, that's what happened, but it wasn't easy, and and their track record for sort of exploiting the Queen was such that she used to have her lady in waiting present when they came and brought the children, stop them taking photographs, which they could subsequently use.
There's some other really fascinating stuff about the early days of the Harry and Meghan courtship in your book, Hugo. I just wanted to talk about these because for a long time, it's been William who has been blamed as the one who told Harry, "Oh, slow down, what are you doing, mate? Like, calm it down, take some time. Is she really the one?" And William has had to cop a lot of that, Hugo, right? He copped it from Harry and Spare, and but what is so interesting about your book is you make it clear that it wasn't just William. You actually report that Charles, then Prince Charles, took the line that Lord Mountbatten had taken with him before he started courting Princess Diana, which was have fun, but don't marry her. And you also report, Hugo, and this was new and really fascinating, that the Queen herself suggested that Harry should wait a year. So it wasn't just William. who
No,
had nervousness about Meghan. It was Charles and the Queen too.
I think what you'll find is that almost certainly, listen, this is just speculation on my part, is that Prince Harry will have told Meghan Markle what members of his family said. And that, of course, will never be forgiven. You know, if he said, look, William has said, steady on or something, you know, she'll have held that against him. And like, that's been part of the problem, you know. But anyway, that's what happened. I mean, that wedding, you know, were you around? I was very much around in Windsor when that
Yes.
and of course, the goodwill towards them was enormous,
Huge.
despite the rather terrible aspects that some of that wedding had. And the crowds were out in force; you could hardly move for it. And what is so interesting is that she very quickly turned that round. Now she would say that she had had a bad time from the British press. And I know what the British press do; they build people up and then they knock them down a bit. But actually, there was sort of several examples of her being rude to staff. I mean, I heard that she was rude to the gardener. The under gardener and the head gardener reported this to the Queen. The Queen got into her car and drove down and ticked her off because you're not to be rude to staff. And what also where I lost it was when this kind of crazy business of Archie being born, and she's the only woman, as far as I know, if you look at the timeline, who gave birth and then subsequently went into labour later in the day, and then
Mm.
of course wouldn't tell us who the godparents were. Frankly, I couldn't care less who the godparents were, but I do think one ought to, why don't you just tell us, So you could see she was kind of had her own agenda. But what I didn't think she would do is to, I never thought she'd stay, to be honest, but I never thought she'd do it in the reign of the Queen, but she was prepared to do that. That's what I find unforgivable. That's why I make those remarks.
Why was she so weird around the birth of Archie? Because again, I was at the Sun at the time, and I posed a whole load of questions to her team, her communications team, and it never made any sense. They lied. They lied about the time. They lied about the location. It was so weird.
It's just so silly, isn't it? I mean, I remember, and I know this is a different example, but when Winston Churchill died, Mary Soames, his daughter, who, let's face it, was, grown up and she was a mother herself by that stage, she said a very interesting point. She said, we knew, he was our father, but we knew he belonged to the nation. And so she had to accept, that the things would be happening on a national level. And that's what the royal family has to accept as well. And most of them understand that. And so you make announcements, you tell people, the child's going to be born, you tell it where it's going to be born, you tell it when it was born, you show the child at a certain point, you tell us who the godparents are going to be. And we all enjoy this. And we're very much then, we, the general public, terribly much on the side of the person doing that and sort of enjoying it because they are a family at the center of the nation. And that's all part of it. So to deny us that, I think, was sort of, kicking causing trouble and showing she was going to do it her way. And that's when things began to go wrong. And Prince Philip said years ago that he thought the interesting thing about the royal family was, and he said this around about the late 60s, some generations relate to the Queen Mother, some relate to us, i.e., the Queen and Prince Philip at that age, some to Charles and Anne, who are growing up. And in a sense, if you have the royal family as a hereditary family, that you can enjoy them all the way through their lives. You can follow them and you can say, oh, yeah, and you can even match yourself against them to some extent. Well, he's doing this at this age. What was I doing? What am I doing? And that sort of thing. And that's what it's all about. And the other great advantage, of course, of having a hereditary royal family is they're above politics. They're working on behalf of the nation, the United Kingdom and so forth. And they're trained from birth to do it. And we know we can trust them because we've seen, for example, the Queen in her little car when she was a little girl. We know where she came from. We know who she was. She didn't climb the slippery pole of politics, and therefore she can go out on behalf of Britain and do all the wonderful things that she did.
100%. 100%. Look, we do have to discuss the Andrew Mountbatten Windsor part of all of this too, because of course it was something that did overshadow to an extent some of the late Queen's final years. But again, what's interesting, Hugo, and I mean, look, I've always reported this too, so you are absolutely spot on, but people don't like to hear it. The Queen did not believe Andrew had done anything wrong, effectively. Look, she certainly never believed that her son had broken the law. She absolutely did not believe that. And she did.
In fact, he takes the same view. What was interesting was that I was looking at winding the clock back to the time when Prince Andrew was born, and you mentioned Lord Mountbatten. He used to go around saying, well, the reason that there was a 10-year gap between Charles and Anne and Andrew and Edward was the fact that Prince Philip wasn't given the Mountbatten name. Absolute nonsense. They were actually dying to have another child, and when this little boy came along, I'm afraid he was rather spoilt. And they were delighted to have him. Of course, it was easier for the Queen at that age to she was more assured in her position as queen to spend more time with her children. So she got more joy out of Andrew and Edward, I think, than the older two. And so, interestingly, when Cecil Beaton came to photograph Prince Edward in 1964,
Mm,
he always had a difficulty photographing the Queen because she wasn't photogenic. Prince Philip, of course, was saying, how long is he going to be here? Hasn't he got enough photographs and so on? And then, of course, Prince Philip would want to use his ladder and ask him what exposure he was using and so forth. Princess Anne apparently was very stroppy. And so Cecil Beaton would say, go to the window, hate it looking to the left, hate it looking to the right. And he took some pictures. But Prince Andrew, at that age, was the politest and nicest little boy. Would you like some more photographs? Yes, I think I would, please. Okay, it
really?
changed later on. And not everybody would see the Prince Andrew we later got to know in that light. But I suspect, in a funny way, that's the little boy that the Queen always saw, and she was always worried about him. She wanted to protect him, and to be fair to him, and most people don't like anyone being fair to him because he's a sort of national pariah now. When he was asked to step down, he did step down. He didn't write a spare book. I mean, to be honest, you have hardly heard from him since. But so she was worried about what was going to happen to him later, and all I can say really is, what a relief that she didn't live long enough to see what actually did happen to him.
Gosh, she would have been horrified by this, wouldn't
Yeah, she
she?
would.
What about that moment when she got him to usher her to her seat at the
It,
memorial service for Prince Philip? Was that some type of sign to the world? This is my son, I stand by him.
I think it's simpler than that. I got into a lot of trouble because I was asked to come in to talk about Prince Philip's memorial service, which I actually attended at Westminster Abbey, and I thought would be a nice conversation about Prince Philip and what sort of character he was and so forth. Instead of which they wanted to talk about Prince Andrew escorting his mother in. Well, Prince Charles was in London and he was dealing with a lot of heads of state who had come over specifically for the funeral, so he was busy. Then Prince Andrew and the Queen travelled up in the car together from Windsor. And as far as I was concerned, if a mother wants to have her son with her to escort her into the Abbey, that's perfectly all right by my book. But people sort of thought he was pushing himself forward and that he was usurping the position. If you think about it, if she'd been brought in by a soldier, an equerry, a nurse, a clergyman, she would have looked like a very old lady. But being brought in with her son seemed to me to be all right. But I promise you, I am in a minority of one.
Yes, indeed, indeed. Well, look, you take a little drink, because we're going to come back in just one moment with Hugo Vickers, the author of Queen Elizabeth II, a personal history, fascinating book, and there is so much more to get into, including why Queen Elizabeth II. I need you to do something for me right now. It is free, it is easy, it is simple. Just hit that subscribe button on YouTube. That's because over 50% of you watching this video haven't done that yet. And it is the best way. No big tech backing, no billionaires pulling the strings. And if you turn on the bell, you'll get alerted to all our new